This is Mike, and it is March 19th, 2020. I'm here in Pennsylvania, and 3 days ago was when the equinox was, when we had 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of darkness. And, you know, from what it looks like is that when things like that are happening in like the environment, you know, what we call what we're living in, the environment, you know, when it's actually 12 hours of day, perfect balance of 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of nighttime, you know, that's what the equinox is. Something happens, and we don't know what that something is, but something does happen. You know, we've not really, it's been hidden what the purpose of, or the significant, it's not just significant, like, you know, there's a thing that occurs when that happens. And so bottom line is, the last couple of days have been weird. Before I begin this presentation, I do want to address the whole coronavirus. I mean, so I'm 48. I've been through this a couple times, you know, like obviously when 9/11 first happened. In fact, I remember when the Oklahoma City bombing occurred. I remember where I was when that happened. There are a couple of these events, that these markers which you can recall where you were, and I can also, you know, now with the 2020 hindsight of experience, you know, you kind of know what you're looking at from a lot of different ways. And this also includes a lot of experiences of thinking that something is going to be something which it turns out not to be, or it turns out to be something different, you know. I don't know if anyone remembers like Comet Ison or Elenin, I think that's how it's pronounced. But these were really interesting kind of build-ups that made a lot of sense, that turned out to not be what was sold, 2012 being the biggest example as well. I'm not necessarily saying that things didn't occur. What I am saying is that what everyone was expecting, the placement of where everyone was expecting the you know, the fireworks to occur, it was not where they happened. Everyone was looking in the wrong direction. So, but that being said, you know, looking at what's happening right now, it's evident that there's a massive change which is occurring, and this is going to be on a very experiential level. Like, you know, if you read the description from Qualcomm, from their website, Qualcomm's like a Scandinavian telecom. They describe 5G, and they say it will. They go through all of these lines, and they're not like, you know, pitching it. You know, they're not trying to sell anyone anything because they're building out the network. They're telling you what it is, and what they say, the very last line in it is, it will be a completely different user experience. And when you take that from the most general sense, like, you know, we are going through a process which will change the user experience. Time is going to tell, you know, whatever that's going to be. But what I do know is I'm uncertain, and I'm paying a lot of attention. And when I think with my rational mind, it's like, you know, I can see all of these different sort of like, oh, this is done for this reason or that reason. And some of them are like, yeah, that sounds great. And some of them are like, wow, that sounds crappy, or what have you. But then when I get out of my head and I just kind of like, you know, how do I feel about all this? Am I anxious inside? Do I have like, you know, this nervous energy? And I'm like, I feel really kind of comfortable. I feel very calm. And so my sense is whatever this is going to unfold, like, there's going to be at the very least a way to navigate it. So really what all of this work, which I try to share, ultimately comes down to is understanding the experience, understanding exactly what it is we're doing in these bodies. And so in the most basic level, like, we all have like this inner experience, and then there's this outer experience, and then they're connected somehow. You know, that's the most basic level. every other scenario it kind of falls in, whether we're a computer simulation or, creation of aliens, or that's one and the same, I don't know. What I do know, in all of those scenarios, whatever we are, we have an inner experience and we have an outer experience, and they relate to one another. And we don't quite understand all of the rules to whatever it is that we're doing. Like, we might know some of them, but there are clues all around. And so what I like to do is try to point out what are clues. And I tell more so the clues in the outer world. And I guess the best way to really think about this is the inner world. If you can imagine what a neural pathway is, and what that is physically, and then what all of the different qualities associated with it, and just kind of like bubble that up, make it like more of a macrocosm, but in resonance and harmony with it. Well, then that's kind of like what I'm going to call etheric pathways. And etheric pathways are like neural pathways in the fact that they're like natural. They're very, very natural. Our brain was, however we got a brain, however it was designed, whatever it was, it got us into this body. It's like, it's made to have these neural pathways. And these neural pathways, they explain, how we do particularly unconscious things, how we do habits and stuff like that. But it's anchored in something physical. And the same is true with these etheric pathways. They're anchored onto something physical, but it's trickier to see because we're within it. And that's, we can understand neural pathways by understanding our behaviors and just by self-awareness. And we can apply those lessons on the greater level, as above, so below, to understanding the etheric pathways. And we will know the etheric pathways really through like coincidence, synchronicity, and usually associations with like, mystical organizations. And so that's what the primary underlying message of all of the Susquehanna mystery sort of stuff is. It's like, hey, this is the biggest etheric pathway that's out there. We don't quite understand what that means, but we can figure this out. The reason why I say it's the biggest is because you look at what's physically the history and the geology tied to this particular physical structure in the environment we live in, and we can see that it is really, really, it's influential. But all of this stuff is kind of behind the scenes. And when you look at it closely, it makes sense. But if you're not really looking closely at it, you're not going to know that it exists. And that's the same thing with neural pathways. Like they can be laid down often by like events that we don't remember. It could be hypnosis. It could be pattern. But it's this deeper sort of stuff. Experiences which create the physical structure of the neural pathways. So the same sort of thing is happening within laying certain types of connections with these etheric pathways, and we can see that by just studying the coincidences and the strange things which we see in the physical world, and really everything is in play. So I'm going to go and I'm going to talk about, I've talked, if you've seen any of the videos, and I definitely recommend you see the Susquehanna mystery videos, you'll begin to understand, like, okay, there's a lot of human story, of history tied into this particular body of water, and we can, it's a big story there. It really holds meat. It has a lot to work with on many, many different levels, from a physical level, from a historical level, from a metaphysical level, from a conspiracy level, from all these different levels. from a mythological level. And what I want to talk about, though, today is really what I think is the strangest sort of piece about this. And I'm kind of growing into like why it's so strange. Like, the research where I'm kind of drawn for my thinking, that's just like, I mean, it's true for all of us. That's like our cutting edge of where we are at any given moment. And so this is an area which I've been spending a lot of like curiosity, just kind of pondering. And particularly with everything we said before about like this strange time and like something's happening. What it is, I don't know, but the timing seems to be rather appropriate. So I would definitely recommend, if you have not already seen some of the other Scranton, Pennsylvania posts I've made, either like on Instagram. I think I've talked about it in a couple different podcasts, but there's a lot of things about Scranton which are interesting, which are worthy of being looked at deeper. And I'm going to gloss over some of them, but I'd recommend, if you haven't seen any of that other stuff, to go in and look at it, because the details are where the real meat is. But let me show you on this map. So right here, this is the Susquehanna River. Each of these flags corresponds to like major things in history. You can see where the Susquehanna River transitions into the Chesapeake Bay, and then where it meets the Atlantic Ocean. And so Scranton, Pennsylvania is located right here, right in this little spot where this bow comes out. And when we want to look at like being able to, I say, quote unquote, read a river, the shapes of the river are really significant. What they're significant to, well, you're going to have to reverse engineer, like look what's happened or what's tied to it, and you kind of understand like what's going on. But there's some interesting things that happen where they're like major turns or major happenings. If this is interesting to you, there's a guy, Goro Adachi. He wrote a book called, I think it's called The River of Time, or Time Rivers. And he does this fascinating analysis of like the Nile and the Amazon, and tying in history on a long scale to the different bends in these rivers, and how the rivers can actually be used as telling a story. And so I don't think it's just limited to time, but that's like kind of a similarity of how you can look at this, and you can look at this river. So we're looking at this one location right here, which is on the outer edge of this northern branch. This is called the northern branch. This is the western branch, and this is the lower Susquehanna. But right here, Scranton, we can see this is a map right here. This is Scranton, PA. This is the Susquehanna River. This point right here is this outer bow. So we see Scranton is like right here. It's like, and this is pretty much, there's not really much going on in this part of the world. Philadelphia is right here. New York City's right here. Baltimore's here. Washington, D.C. is right here. But all of this is kind of like, probably the biggest city might be Binghamton, New York, which is going to be located right around here. But this is where we are, this part of the world. It's not particularly well populated, but it's close to the largest population center on the planet. So Scranton is probably best known for, in the collective mind, from the TV show The Office. And this is what really got into my, what gets Scranton into my radar. One is I live in Pennsylvania, so I'm already kind of like on alert, I suppose, of like, anything that feels like home. I mean, that's just how human beings are wired. We look that way. But then also it's like this show was particularly successful, and it was unusual. It was kind of groundbreaking. And anytime you see something which was very successful and groundbreaking in culture, and particularly if it comes from the UK, you could make a pretty fair assumption that this is, the workings of some pretty high planned really, really skilled neuropropagandists. And so, you study the show and you're going to learn a lot about the messaging. And so the fact that the show is in Scranton, I'm like, all right, well, that's interesting in itself. And so a couple things I want to point out is we see The Office, it ran from 2005 to 2013. Scranton, Pennsylvania, it's got a population of 77,000 people. So less than 100,000 people, less than, the amount of, you can't even fill up some of these larger sports arenas with every single person in Scranton. 77,000 is a decent sized number, but you're not filling up a major sports center. And I also want to point out two guys who were, the couple people, a lot of people came out, actors came out of The Office and were able to parlay that into big Hollywood careers, if you will. But John Krasinski, he definitely was one of them. And then, I don't know exactly what B.J. Novak is doing, but I do know that this guy was young and he was an executive producer in a lot of the episodes. And I always thought that was interesting, and we're going to come back to this in a little bit, but we're going to look a little bit more into Scranton. Scranton's also of interest because this is where we find the hometown of Hugh Rodman, the father of Hilary Clinton. So Hilary Clinton, her lineage goes through Scranton, as does Joseph Biden. Joseph Biden's through Scranton. And there are a lot of interesting people from Scranton. That's what we're going to start to look at right now is all of the, this tiny little city and what's going on here. There's well, you're going to see. So, all right. So we got a couple other people I want to highlight from Scranton. We got B.F. Skinner, who's from Scranton. This guy is we live in a behaviorist controlled world, and this guy is the father, at least credited as the father of behaviorism. So he's from Scranton. Howard Gardner, who very influential psychologist in terms of how we understand learning. He multiple intelligences theory. I think that's what it's called. He came up with it. But these two very big name psychologists, or how many are there? And they're both from this same small town. Mother Jones, the co-founder, is from there. And then you got this weird connection of Rite Aid, Woolworths, and Banana Republic, the original one before it was purchased by Gap. They were all founded out of Scranton. But I want to, which is interesting. But the next real heavy hitter I want to bring up is this guy Frank Carlucci, who's from Scranton, and he was Secretary of the Department of Defense from '87-'89, only 2 years. But this guy is a major player. So he was very close with Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld, and that was kind of the group which he ran around, and he was the head of the Carlyle group. And if you know your history, the Carlyle groups, you got to know who they are. And this guy, he ran it. In fact, he was at a meeting with Carlyle investors with George Bush Sr. and the senior members of the Bin Laden family. He's thought of by a lot of people to have been the orchestrator, the actual, the person who got it done, the ultimate project manager of those events. And so this dude is also from Scranton, all right? And so let's go and look at this. So, this movie, The Irishman, which came out this year, the Scorsese film with De Niro, Al Pacino, and Joe Pesci. It's the ultimate. If you wanted to go and have the ultimate swan song of this genre of actor and film and storyteller, this would be it. So this is the ultimate going out. And though we mostly think of this movie, if you've seen it, as the telling of Jimmy Hoffa, it's really the real player in this movie, or which they're pointing at, is this Bufalino crime family. For it's this Bufalino crime family, which was like the really, really big crime family. You know, it says right here, the movie didn't even scratch the surface. And like the idea is like, if you know, we're a culture which loves the Cosa Nostra, you know, we love the mafia, and we love to understand like how they do things. And one of the things we know is like, it's the hidden. And so you can kind of like say like, well, if you know about it, you know, it can't be too hidden. And so now we're like peeling back the onion, and we see like this family which is furthest away from like New York City or Philadelphia is actually, you know, this is the biggest, most influential family of them all. And so the Joe Pesci character, and you see him like, you know, he is front and center right there. You know, it's called The Irishman. It makes you think that it's about this guy right here, but this is who the movie's about. Look at who's getting that positioning. And it's not about him, it's about who he represents. So it's the Bufalino, and where they moved from Pittston to Kingston, Pennsylvania. This is Kingston, Pennsylvania. It's right by 40 Foot. We're going to get to that in a moment. This is right on the Susquehanna River, and this is 15 miles from Scranton. So yeah, it's not like it's if you know what a bullseye looks like, there are a lot of rings, like, you know, they're the opposite ends of the inner ring. Like this is the same place in the world, but it's not like, you know, they're 15 miles apart. But we're just starting to warm up. So, you know, we've got Clinton, we've got Carlucci, we got Biden, we've got Bufalino. They're all in this place which the office is pointing to. But what else is there? We're going to go and look at the Institute of Hermetic Studies. They're located at Wyoming. And Wyoming is where we get the massacre of Wyoming. And that's what I go into in another talk. You really need to understand the massacre of Wyoming. This is where it happened, right here, right in this spot. And Wyoming is where we find the Institute of Hermetic Studies, which was founded in Wilkes-Barre, which is right down here. And here's Scranton. We can see this is all within like 4 or 5 miles of Scranton, Wyoming is. No, it's 10 miles. Wyoming's 10 miles from Scranton, excuse me. So this is... The Institute of Hermetic Studies maintains a complete working curriculum for the instruction of its members in the Hermetic arts and sciences, including Kabbalah, plant and mineral alchemy, Rosicrucianism, Martinism, and the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And you know, it's you know, it's a small school, like in comparison to something like Amorc, which you're going to go find in Silicon Valley. You know, that's this big fancy sort of place. In a way, this isn't, but in a way, this is an interesting institution. Mark Stavish, I believe he's the founder. He's definitely the guy who's running it. Maybe he's not the founder. And he's like, he is a scholarly esotericist. Like, listen to some of his work, read some of his books. Like, this guy is like, he's the real deal. And so this is where he's located. He's located right here. And so if you go on his website, and his website is like, you know, I think it's kind of like, the fact that it almost feels dated is almost like this is beyond like of a timeline. Like, this is, I'm letting you know that this is here, and you'll understand the depth of this institution by looking at the quality of the works there. But on the website, which is just, you know, it looks kind of dated, there's this picture of Mark Stavish. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Stavish or Stavish. It's a picture of him with producer-director Guy Ritchie after taping an interview in London. Okay, so I guess so Stavish went to London for Ritchie's upcoming feature-length film on esoteric wisdom and teachings. And so we have this, like, this is front center of the website. And it's linking here, Stavish with Guy Ritchie. And this is where it's going to start getting a little bit interesting. We got Guy Ritchie, who's probably from a celebrity perspective, you know, maybe outside of his body of work, he's probably best remembered as being married to Madonna. And right around the time that they were, during the time of their marriage, it was, you know, celebrity news that Madonna changes her name and claims the Hebrew name Esther. And this has to do with her Kabbalistic status, I guess. You know, I don't know if she gave herself name. I don't know exactly how that works, but she was publicly associated with the name Esther, and it's tying into the Kabbalistic tradition. And as we know, that the Institute of Hermetic Studies is a Kabbalistic institute, and we see that Guy Ritchie's wife is Esther. And the reason why that's interesting is because right in this exact same location is where we find this historical marker, the Bloody Rock. And you can see right down here, I'm going to cut to the chase, it's Queen Esther. So we got Queen Esther there. And who is Queen Esther? We're going to see this historical significance. This from is talking about, let me first show you where it is. So we've got right here's the Susquehanna River. Right here is Wyoming, where we're going to find where the massacre of Wyoming occurred. It actually occurred at 40 Fort. This is where those that were massacred were in 40 Fort, and they came out here, and this is where they were massacred. This is where the Institute of Hermetic Studies is. This is where the Bufalino crime family, where they were, and then this is where we have this Bloody Rock Queen Esther. And so what is that, the Bloody Rock? On the night of July 3rd, 1778, after the Battle of Wyoming, 14 or more captive American soldiers were murdered here by a maul wielded by a revengeful Indian woman, traditionally but not certainly identified as Queen Esther. And then they've got this marker, and they've got this is the rock right here, and it's memorialized with this like chain link fence, and you can see it's right there. Now, if you do a little bit of digging, this was a highly propagandized event. The events of Bloody Rock were told throughout the colonies, and it really helped. It was used to motivate colonists to become involved in the revolution. And the central to the telling of the story was, you know, there's always a bad guy, and the bad guy in this telling is Queen Esther. And if you do a little bit of research, you're going to go and see that Queen Esther had this sterling reputation throughout, like, the whole Iroquois nation part of the world. I mean, that's where we are with Scranton. We're like right here. Let's go look at this map. This is where all of that is. Right around here, this is where all the Finger Lakes are. All of this area. Like, this area was highly, it was rich and dense with culture and people. And during this like transitional, like 1600s to 1700s people of this are transitioned to as like culture is being created and destroyed. You know, during this time is when Queen Esther was alive, and she held a very, very strong reputation as she bridged both sides of that cultural kind of gap. And so it was out of character for her to have been the perpetrator of these very, very kind of like violent. The story goes is like these guys were held down and their heads were bashed in on the rock, and then they were thrown into this river. This is like part of the myth, and it all happened here on 40 Fort. And what really looks like what's happening is like, something happened and there was a telling of a story of a certain way. And this is where we get Queen Esther. And we got Queen Esther is also another, a rich resonator with Queen Esther from the Bible, which is who Madonna was naming herself after, the Queen Esther from Purim. And the Queen Esther from Purim, if you know the story of Purim, that's very much there's a revenge killing type of aspect to that story. And if you continue along with the story of it's really the myth of Queen Esther and Bloody Rock. Apparently she was hunted down and there was a massacre done to make right what happened to the colonists at 40 Fort. And so like the whole thing is just like, it's if you start reading through the information, the analysis, it's like the whole thing is just like as propagandized then as it is now. But this is where the event is tied. That's really what I want to point to. And like the characters, like the depth of characters in terms of the symbolism and the wattage which they are connected to, like they're in the same place. It's all right here. So now we're going to go and we're going to get even weirder. So we began this talking about The Office, and that's not the only sort of pop culture reference as it relates to this area, Scranton. The web television series based upon the Philip K. Dick novel, The Man in the High Castle, Scranton plays a very significant role in that as well. And I'm not that familiar with the Philip K. Dick novel. I'm familiar with Philip K. Dick, and I recognize whenever his name is touched to something, like, I don't know who or what he was or is or what have you, but he was the blueprint maker for what culture looks like today, or at least what technology looks like today. And so the guy is telling a story and he seems to know something which either people are following or he's writing the story, because I don't know how this game is exactly structured. I don't know how it works. But that being said, The Man in the High Castle is a alternative history story of when the Nazis won World War II. And that's kind of like the backdrop. And there are all these different kind of like subplots and sub-stories. And within that plethora of different places where this story goes, one of them is the fact that there was this Die Nemenwelt, I don't know, I'm trying to say it. And what that is it's this is what the plot line is. It was a project, like an MK Ultra project. MK Ultra projecting is very, this is where the models came from the Nazi. From the Nazi model. Its goal was to produce this Project 701, this Die Nemenwelt. The goal was produce a quantum tunneling device that could artificially replicate the means by which travelers were able to physically cross between alternative worlds. And what in the storyline of The Man in the High Castle is like this is the name of the device of how Nazis were able to go to different dimensions, interdimensional Nazis. That's what this is about. And the device, the thing, there was like this tunnel, this the mechanism, their CERN, whatever you want to call it, that they did with it, they called it this Die Nemenwelt. Die Nemenwelt, I'm sorry for butchering this. And in The Man in the High Castle, it is located deep within the Lackawanna coal mine of the Poconos. So where is that? What is the Lackawanna coal mine? It's in Scranton. I thought I have a picture of it somewhere. Do I not? Here it is. It's right in front of me. So the Lackawanna coal mine is a museum and retired coal mine in Scranton, Pennsylvania. It's literally, it's not just like in the TV show, they refer to it as the Poconos, but they don't necessarily call it so tightly to Scranton. But what they do call it, this Lackawanna coal mine, that is Scranton. That is undoubtedly Scranton. And that is also a location, or at least a plot device in one of the Office television episodes from season 1. And so we have now a double connection of popular culture pointing back to Scranton. And this one is getting a little bit freaky because now we're talking about it being a connection to quantum jumping, for lack of a better word. And so from the Man in the High Castle, the site was chosen not only because of its proximity to a rare anomaly, a particularly thin area in the fabric of reality which would make it much easier to breach into alternate worlds. And so now I want to go back to what I was talking about in the beginning. It's like, we can tell what's going on this etheric pathway level by studying, what has happened there. What is the geology there? What is the history there? What is the pop culture there? Like looking at it from all these different perspectives, because the same is true with understanding your neural pathways. We're working with symbolism. That's why people are triggered. A trigger pulls you into an established neural pathway, and a trigger works because of its symbolic resonance. So as above, so below. Etheric pathways are all symbolism also. So when we see that this body of water, when you go and you look at all of the Susquehanna mystery, and it's so strongly connected to everything which we're seeing in culture, the first computer, the first electrical distribution of 3 wires, the birth of globalism, the Baseball Hall of Fame, the National Groundhog Day, National Groundhog Day celebration, Herkimer Diamonds, the eastern headquarters of NATO, like all of this is here, plus Washington, D.C., all this stuff is right here. And one of the questions I always have is the why. And so I'm not saying this is the case, but this is exactly what I've always thought was the case, is that this area is particularly significant to what it means to breach different worlds. What different worlds are, I'm not really certain. I've had some interesting experiences, but considering the weirdness which we're seeing, like all options should be on the table. So, okay. A little bit deeper with this Man in the High Castle. So particularly the TV show, there are a lot of different storylines with different characters, and the man who is actually named for the show, the character who was the Man in the High Castle, which is very similar to this. Like the Irishman, it was talking about this De Niro character, though it's really the story of the Bufalino family. The same is kind of true here. Like, it's called The Man in the High Castle, and this actor played the Man in the High Castle, but it's really the other characters who really make up the majority of the telling of the stories. But nonetheless, the Man in the High Castle, who had a relatively small, though significant part within the within this narrative, what he did was it was never really clear, I don't think, of what these were, but he was collecting, or he was creating these films of alternate realities showing the United States as it was under Nazi rule. Okay? So think about the timing of this video and what we talked about before and what's unfolding before us. So it's like this man in the higher cat, in the man in the, what do they call it? The man in the high castle. I always have trouble saying it. That's telling of the story of the United States underneath the influence of actually both Japanese and Nazi rule. But this character here was showing movies to the occupied citizens of North America of like, hey, this is another version, and it was that was a big plot device. And as you can also see, like, so was time travel within this TV show as well. So they're blended with these stories. So this character here, this man in the higher castle, this guy who was the actual link between different alternative realities, or at least within people's minds, or at least with making, keeping morale up. He used to do he was on a TV show back in the 80s called NewsRadio. And I'm going to kind of back into this because NewsRadio is where we first get Joe Rogan. That's where Joe Rogan was first introduced into the American, like in a major way, to the American collective mindset. Now Joe Rogan is arguably, one of the most influential people on this planet, considering the reach of his podcast. And the very nature of podcast is a very, very influential way of conveying information because it's so personal. Excuse me. So Joe Rogan got his start on NewsRadio, and just by the title of it, it's that's a podcast. You could arguably say like a podcast is a modern version of what news or talk radio once was. And Joe Rogan, his character on that show, was a janitor, and the guy who owned the radio station was this actor here. So Rogan's character and this guy's character, they represent the top and the bottom of whatever this ensemble cast of NewsRadio. I'd really recommend you going and I don't even remember when I talked about this, but somewhere I talked about in great detail this NewsRadio Joe Rogan connection, because it kind of it provides more detail for where we're going with here. So Joe Rogan is the link, and Joe Rogan is really, really significant. And this actor Stephen Root's done some interesting films as well. But what's so interesting is, like, not only does The Man in the High Castle and The Office connect to Scranton, Pennsylvania, what all of this is about, but so does this high school in Boston. For what's it called? It's called Newton South High. John Krasinski, B.J. Novak, and Joe Rogan, not all at the same time. B.J. and John, they were there at the same time. They all went to the same high school in the suburbs of Boston. So that's I want to point that out, like almost as this full circle of kind of like the synchromysticism. So now we're going to go a layer deeper. And so now we're going to go, and I'm going to bring up this show called Exploring the Unknown with Mary Sutherland. I've never heard of it before. Apparently it was it was a radio show. I know it was around at least in 2005. I don't know if it's still on the air. But apparently it was very UFO oriented. And they did a particular episode, and it was an episode that was significant enough that that Mary Sutherland herself went to investigate herself, or what was the purpose of this episode, and it's the mysteries of Oliphant, Pennsylvania. And I could find very, very little on this, but this very controversial character, it seems like a lot of people, like there's a lot of shade thrown his way. This John Peruka, who is saying that Oliphant, Pennsylvania somehow has this very, very strong connection with ancient Egypt. And he had all sorts of information, enough information that captured her attention. And I guess she's written a bunch of books, and she went and investigated it. And she was like, yeah, there's some weird stuff going on. And part of what he was saying is how, like, all of the churches of this Oliphant, this looks like what? This is the Orion constellation. Yeah, this is the belt of Orion. And so I guess the same general layout is found in some buildings in Oliphant, but I think it's got to be more so than that to garner the sort of attention he received. But anyway, it's you know, this was it. This also it was located next to where the Harry Houdini Museum was. You know, why Harry Houdini was there. He's not from Scranton. I believe the people who run it have a connection to Scranton, but this is where this centerpiece was. And it's just kind of interesting. You know, I guess there was a UFO sighting, and, you know, you could go and research this yourself. But this Oliphant, Pennsylvania, you know, where is it? There's Oliphant, and there's Scranton. So Scranton is 2 miles, no, excuse me, that's 4 miles from Oliphant. So we know that Scranton here was 15 miles all the way down to Kingston. So we're talking more or less about 20 miles, which on this line, because this line, let me see where we can pick this up. This line is basically here's Scranton, and right up here, up on the top, is Oliphant. It goes all the way down, and all of this strange stuff is being connected to it, including interdimensional travel and friggin' Egypt. So this one last piece to kind of just really leave you scratching your head, because we're in head-scratching times. Something's happening in our world, and part of that is seeing things in a different way, and some of the stuff which has been hiding in front of us the whole time. And this is true for all of us. Like, no matter whatever you're thinking, whatever you think is going on with this coronavirus, no matter what you think this story is, I guarantee that whatever is going to be revealed will be different than what you are anticipating. That's just kind of the nature of how this is working. But here we have Scranton. Right here we have the Susquehanna River. And this is bringing us up. I'm going to show you right here. So if this is Scranton, this is bringing us up this direction. So we're talking about this location, like right about here, like right inside this big fold. And what we have there is, you can see it's called Standing Stone. It's actually, Standing Stone is right here. So this says it's 38 miles. This is where we're talking about. And Standing Stone is interesting. We can see this right here. This is a map. That's where Standing Stone is. And it's right adjacent to this thing called French Asylum. So first, and you can see, outstanding geologic feature of Pennsylvania, Standing Stone and French Asylum. And this was something that was written in like the Pennsylvania State, geological, you know, it's a state-funded publication. And so the first thing is they're talking about this right here, this Standing Stone, this prominent landmark in the shoreline of the Susquehanna River. And there's this 25-foot high block of sandstone, and that's this here. And here's another description of it. The name Standing Stone was given to this locality, so right here, by the Indians on account of a very remarkable stone right here, which stands in the river near its right bank. So right there. This stone, from the top to the bed of the river, is 44 feet high. It's 16 feet wide and about 4 feet thick. So this was written a while ago. This article, which was from the Pennsylvania State Geological Department, which this image came from, this was written in 2002. If I were to guess by reading just like how this language was written, this was probably written in like the font. This is probably at least 20 or 30 years old, written by someone who's probably 60 years old at the time. But what we're learning is they called it 44. And remember, this is connecting us right to where all of this action is. 40 Fort, which is where Queen Esther, or at least where the Bloody Rock is located. Whoever, whatever is associated with it. That is like, you know, a rather dark piece of history. Whether it was truly used for sacrifice or not, I don't know. But it's at least memorialized as is. And so we go back here and we see that this is resonating, this standing stone. And it's right next to this before I get to French Asylum, let me finish this. It is 16 feet wide and about 4 feet thick. At ordinary low water, the stone is 22 or 25 feet above the surface of the river. The lower edge of the stone must penetrate the surface of the earth to considerable depth in order to be able, as it has, to resist the force of the water in freshets and the ice, which, when the river breaks up, suddenly moves with apparently irresistible power. So what they're saying, and that's why this is a geological feature, is this rock. And it says it's sandstone, which, you know, I'm not a geologist, but sandstone doesn't sound like a particularly strong rock. Like some of the stone around here that is strong. So I don't know if this is the diabase, which is the strong stuff, but sandstone, you know, to be able to handle the force of the Susquehanna River, which is immensely, immensely powerful, and for it to be standing perpendicular and not be moved, like this is a really special rock. And this location was identified to be French asylum and corruption of asylum. This is as it's described, and this is from the same document which was put out by the state. And it was the short-lived haven for refugees of the 1793 French Revolution. And so we're kind of conditioned to think of the term maybe asylum and refugees from a revolution. Like we're going to be thinking of that in modern terms of, like, you know, someone who's escaping with their life, and they're usually like poor and they don't have a lot of stuff. But if this is the 1700s, like that person is probably, you know, they killed him. The people who got to leave are the aristocrats. These are the guys who are like running the show. That's how they got out. And so this was going to be the home of the Queen of France, Marie Antoinette. Let them eat cake. I mean, this woman was a nasty woman. If there was such a person as like a Queen Esther, or at least maybe thinking more so in terms of how that energy is being expressed, like the way the story of Bloody Rock, the way that was told is of this really, really nasty expression. And we see that also told with Marie Antoinette. So we're seeing this link again of this kind of like this nasty expression. And so, you know, what has been propagandized, what is not, I don't know. But what I do know for certain is that this had to have been a very, very significant location. For whatever significant the reason why, like this location was important. And my guess is the fact that the standing stone was there, which probably predates 1793 by a long, long time, that this was the place. And so now when we look at this, this is where we have Scranton. This is where we have Standing Stone. This is all along the river. And the river here, you know, this is, you know, going up here, and the river continues to meander, and then it folds back. And I've got this marker, this flag right here. And right here is where the river folds down. And I didn't include this at all today, but this is the location in the river where Joseph Smith is said to have been visited and baptized by John the Baptist, and it gave him the authority to begin, which was known as the Church of Latter-day Saints. You know, this is known as where the Arianic priesthood was born, right here. All in this same sort of part of the world. All of these different stories dealing with different types of people in different time. And something's going on here. Some of it's dark. A lot of it's dark. But it's immensely, immensely powerful.